So in this session, we are going to talk about what is JDBC and then how this Hibernate comes into the picture. What is a high level ORM understanding? So first, let's understand what is JDBC. So JDBC is a traditional way of connecting your Java program with database, irrespective of any DBMS, Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, or any other thing. There are few pros and cons that if you use JDBC, it's a clean and simple SQL processing, good performance with large data, very good for a small application, and simple syntax and easy to learn. So that these are the pros. It is complex if it is used in large project. It is a large programming overhead, no encapsulation, hard to implement MVC concept, and query is DBMS specific. So let me tell you, starting from my experience, when I was a junior developer, and that time I used to have JDBC as the only way to connect to database. I created a small program on my developer machine which connects with the database, provides certain operations, transactions. So it was inserting, updating, deleting, doing all some sort of CRUD operations, and then finally it is storing the output in a file format. That was very standard program, and I developed it and ran it for unit testing thousands time. It was working flawlessly, never raised any complaint. But what happened next when I moved this into production? Because in QA also this issue was not caught. The reason is QA again has regular maintenance activity that goes without any issues. There were no spikes in terms of CPU usage or anything which you could observe. So what happens in production one day, and glad it was for a small company that gave me this learning, but this is like you learn from your own mistake or you learn from others' mistake. So this is your chance to learn from my mistake, what I have done. So in production scenario, what happened when this program, my program runs over the week time, it creates a lot of connection which I was not closing in my program. It was always open, and this piles up to the maximum threshold for a database to have open connection. And after that, what happens next? The CPU usage goes really high and it stops all the other processing. So that DBA used to restart this. And then this problem went for a couple of weeks, not just 1 week. And just think how big it could be in current scenarios where a company like Oracle, a company like any financial system, someone could, a junior developer like me could have caused this issue, right? This could have blown their hundreds and thousands of dollars. So what was the problem when I sat with DB? And surprisingly, because this problem was coming again and again, and there was some hint that some Java utility is doing this particular stupid thing, which is creating a lot of connection. And I realized that just single line of a statement, which should be there in my program to close the connection, that was missing. There are two ways. One, that programmer itself should be efficient enough and understand what could be the repercussions which he or she may not be able to see it on the developer machine, rather than framework itself support that a programmer cannot do such a stupid mistake. So by the way, this story is one of my friend who did it. I just try to keep you guys engaged so that you should know that a simple statement could cause that harm. Now, what is this object relational relation mapping, ORM, or particularly any tool which handles database connectivity, provides you interfaces for any transaction that take care of all these minute details: how to open the result set, how to open a connection, how to close the connection, how to close the transaction. So any minute thing, this framework can do it implicitly without any issue. Let's talk about why object relationship mapping. When we work with an object oriented system, so obviously Java is a OOPS language, and in Java we have database table. We have a representation as a class here. So what we say that in the table, we have a table, and the same table represent as a class on or an object in Java. So how to map these things is called object relationship mapping. Now here is one example. Your employee table, which has ID, first name, last name, and salary, 4 columns in the employee table. If we need to see how that class looks into, how that table looks into a class, this is a representation. You have private int, private string for last name and salary, and then similarly you have setter and getter. If you look at the table view of this data, it should be something like that. ID should be not null, auto increment, and a primary key, obviously, and then first name, last name, and salary. So with very simple table and object mapping, it's pretty straightforward that you have one-on-one mapping, but sometimes structure is not as simple. We have the complex structure. We have master child relationship, one to one relationship, one to many relationship, and so on and so forth. Now let's understand, if we need to modify the design of our database for application of few pages for loading and storing the data, it exposes to five mismatches. Granularity, sometimes you will have an object model which has more classes than the number of corresponding tables. That's a very common problem when you work with any ORM, because in Java class you can handle it with one class, whereas in table, if you go, that same class represent multiple tables. So the granularity is one problem. Inheritance, RDBs do not define anything similar to inheritance in Java, right? In Java we have inheritance, object oriented programming language. In RDBMS it is missing. We have a master child relationship there. Then identity in RDBMS defines exactly one notion of sameness and the primary key. Java has two different ways to do the identity check, right? It's a equals to double equals to b, or a dot equals to b. And you know, if you have worked on Java, if you work on a string, this is true. If you work on any complex object, it is not true. A double equal to b will have different results. A dot equals b will have different results. It is not true in case of string. Then associations. Object-oriented language represent association using object references, whereas an RDBMS represent an associations as a foreign key column. So if you have worked on any RDBMS, you know that there can be multi-level of master-child relationship, but in case of associations in Java. And the last thing, which is a mismatch, navigation. The way you access object in Java and RDMS is fundamentally very, very different. What is ORM? All major programming language. If you talk about Python, if you talk about Node, if you talk about C Sharp, if you talk about Java. So in Java itself, if you talk about ORM, there are multiple ORMs available within. So we have Hibernate, we have TopLink, iBetis, MyBetis. These are all ORM tools and frameworks available that is built mostly on top of Hibernate. So the idea here is, what are the advantage? You need not to bother about how to deal with the database, and database can be changed from MySQL to Postgres or to any other database system without any major change in your Java code. So that was the benefit, because if you remember, Oracle was very costly, MySQL was free, Postgres when was introduced, it was very highly scalable. So earlier, this was a very common practice that application moves from one platform to any other platform based on the kind of flexibility and the scalability they provide. So the first thing, let's business code access objects rather than DB tables. So SQL injection used to be a very common problem when we work directly with queries. And then what does it mean? Because you expose query in the database name, database table name, and column name. So the hacker or someone who with the wrong intention, he knows everything about your database. And sometimes with your web browser, you expose a JavaScript method where you can override the query, and someone can pull out the data which you do not want to provide access to, and they can also delete the data. So this was very common using SQL injection, but with ORM this problem is solved now, because no one can directly interact with database. They have to go through an interface which is created by this ORM layer. Then second is the same based on JDBC under the hood. So obviously, as I talked about the problem statement where the connection was not closed, it is taking care of all these minute details. And then the fourth one, no need to deal with the database implementation. Exactly. If you know Java, if you know how to read and write data, you should not even worry about what database query I need to create with, until unless you are not going for very advanced case. Entities based on business concept rather than database structures. You should not be worried about transaction management, state management, everything is provided as part of the ORM package. So Java object, then on the right side we have RDBMS. ORM is a bridge between Java objects and RDBMS so that developers who are working on this side, they do not bother what is the structure we have on the RDBMS side. And it is both ways. RDBMS does not know what is happening on the Java side. This creates a bridge so that we just use a method or the interfaces here to interact with RDBMS. And obviously someone sitting on the left side who's coming with a hacker mindset, obviously they do not know the implementation of RDBMS at all. That's another benefit that we briefly talked about earlier. Now, what are the supported database? You will see all RDBMS are supported here, and some of the new RDBMS, for example, so it is part of in-memory database. That's all supported with the list here. And I primarily worked with MySQL, Postgres, and Oracle that works flawlessly with the ORM systems. Now, in terms of Hibernate architecture, so this is a very common structure or the setup. You will see the Java application is talking to persistent object. Persistent object is taking the data from hibernate.properties, XML mapping for any associations or one-to-many or many-to-one kind of relationship. And then finally, it is interacting with database. This is what Hibernate with this structure was launched for, but this was improved over the period of time, and these properties and XML mapping were taken over by annotations. So we will talk about both how that is working. But if we look at the Java side of it, how these properties and XML mapping finally resulting into, so these are the basic or tier 1 level support that GTA, JDBC and JNDI, that is the first level of layer that interacts with database, and these are the basic core functionality of Java. On top of it, Hibernate is built. So they are using these interfaces JTA, JDBC and JNDI to provide functionality. And how do they do? They have certain top level interfaces like configuration, session factory, session, transaction, query and criteria. With the help of these interfaces, they are interacting with JTA, JDBC and JNDI, and finally helping a Java developer to interact with the database.